Welcome to this talk, I would say, about blue innovation. We're here with two great experts in the subject. So I would introduce very briefly who we're talking to today, and then ask a few questions about how they see, how they experience blue innovation in their research, in their work, and how do they see the future for these realities. So I have the pleasure to have here with me Stephen O'Leary. He's a Canadian, and he's in the National Research Council of Canada. The National Research Council of Canada is not a funding institution, as we just learned yesterday. So, in fact, it's a research center. Stephen, you are the lead, a research team lead on algal genomics and synthetic biology. Would you tell us what this is? What does it mean?
Very good. Am I broadcasting through this?
Use this.
I'll use this one. That's much better. Thank you, Valeria. So maybe I'll talk a little bit about my team, which is algal genomics and synthetic biology. We are working on experimental cultivation of algae, both seaweeds and microalgae, for high-value products that go into animal feed and human applications. That's the algal genomics part. We're not looking to generate genetically modified organisms that we're going to plant into the ocean. We are looking at natural variability that can be exploited through cultivation conditions. The synthetic biology part is more on genetic modification of microalgae, which we're referring to as green cell platforms, for the production of high-value plant chemicals, including terpenoids and plant compounds that can be biosynthesized photosynthetically. They can also be synthesized through non-photosynthetic microbes, but we are focusing on a photosynthetically driven application for high-value compounds. So two very different things. One is exploitation of natural resources. The other is modification of photosynthetic microorganisms for the production of natural compounds, but in an unnatural setting. I would mention that that's the area of expertise I represent. My research center for the National Research Council of Canada is called the Aquatic and Crop Resource Development Center. And so we also look at, through my colleagues, other sources of marine biomass, including invertebrate biomass, and then the sort of regular traditional harvest of fisheries and aquaculture as well.
Thank you. And the other guest that we have here is Vitor Vasconcelos. He's the director of CIMAR, the Interdisciplinary Center of Marine and Environment Research in Porto, in Portugal. Victor, would you like to tell us what you do, what's your job, and how do you use this blue in your daily activities?
Okay, thank you, Valeria. I think I had the double power of the microphones. Thank you very much. So, in fact, I'm a biologist. I work my own group on marine biotechnology using cyanobacteria as sources of novel compounds. What we do is we created a culture collection of cyanobacteria that we make available to everybody that works with these organisms. And we first of all, we dig by gene mining the potential of some of these species to produce interesting compounds for different biotechnological applications. And then whenever we find those species that could be interesting, we culture them, we do a bioassay guided isolation of novel compounds, and we are interested in different approaches. Of course, pharma is one of them. We have interest in finding new antibiotics because multi-drug resistant bacteria are a very important issue worldwide. But we are also interested in novel anti-malarian compounds, cosmetics applications, which are much faster to reach the market compared to the pharma. And also anti-fouling substances, because we found that cyanobacteria in the natural environment, sometimes they form biofilms that prevent other organisms to grow. And so we can have this potential see what are the substances behind this behavior, and then try to develop new compounds to be used in anti-fouling paintings for ships and for other, maritime applications. This is what I do in my own research group. But then as you said, I'm director of CIMAR, which is a center with more than 450 people working. It's based in Porto, close to the University of Porto. And we have three main research lines. We, first of all, are interested to understand how the ocean functions from a physical, biological, and chemical point of view. So we work on global changes and ecosystem services, where we try to understand what we have in terms of resources, how can we exploit them in a sustainable way, and then whenever there are problems associated with the contamination, what can be the solutions to remediate these problems. And this is a very multidisciplinary team. We have from, biochemists, chemists, lawyers, engineers. It's a very, in fact, it's one of our strengths of CIMAR. Then we have another group on aquaculture, because as we know, aquaculture has to grow in order to, satisfy the needs for proteins coming from the sea and from other blue ecosystems. And so we are interested in not only domesticating new species to aquaculture, but also to produce ways of raising from algae to fish in a sustainable way by using, for instance, probiotics, bacteria that can prevent the use of antibiotics, or eventually use integrated multi-trophic aquaculture that can produce in the same system different species by providing then a water free of contaminants. And finally, the third research line is marine biotechnology. So we use mostly microbial resources, because we believe that life started with microbes and will end with microbes in this planet, so we are just passing by. And using microbes to not just understand the dynamics of the ecosystems, but also to extract the potential of these organisms. And cultivating microbials is sustainable, because we don't need to harvest, algae or sponges from the ocean. So that's a very interesting vision, because we can also optimize the ways of cultivating these organisms and then extracting the potential, like we might have, for instance, using these organisms to remediate oil spills, like we have in a nice project that is out there. I can talk about it.
We'll talk about it in some detail later. So thank you so much. And I actually share your view on the microbes dominating the life on Earth. I even sometimes think that we actually should think of a reverse pyramid, where the microbes are at the top of the evolution range for their ability to mutate and change and adapt. So, but anyways, this is a philosophical discussion for another time, perhaps. So I notice, for example, you're working on aquaculture, and you're trying to understand what are better ways to use sustainable production. And in that sustainability, we know very well that, especially for carnivore fish, we are trying to use vegetable ingredients to feed the proteins, because, of course, the protein shortage is actually a problem of our times. And on the other hand, Stephen told us that they're working on seaweed and microbes to actually produce those ingredients. Do you get to talk to each other, not necessarily one person to the other, but into these domains? Do you contact your counterparts, your aquaculture counterparts? Do you contact those producers that are working in this realm?
Maybe I'll start with that. So this is a better distance, I think. So at the research center where I am in Halifax, Nova Scotia, one of our divisions is in algal research, which I lead. We have a second division that's in aquaculture, and as you've indicated, there is a very close link internally in our organization between those two sides. We are cultivating primarily microalgal species to determine their availability of production and quality of protein specifically for aquaculture feeds, as well as looking at the potential to transfer lipid from microalgae to aquatic species, including shellfish and finfish. So internally, it's a very vibrant conversation between two research divisions, an algal research division and an aquaculture research division, and then we rely on our colleagues in the aquaculture research division to take that knowledge to industry. And so it's interesting because there's a conversation at one scale internally between two divisions of applied research, and then we rely on our partners in the aquaculture side then to take that out to application. And it's something that works well. There is a lot of interest in, as you mentioned, non-fish sources of protein or non-aquatic sources of protein to supplement aquaculture diets. I think that there's a lot of evidence that algae, microalgae, and in some cases seaweed, although less for the protein, but in a small amount protein, there's some availability of these cultivated sources to supplement or displace what comes from fish meal and fish oil now. And there's a reason that we're pursuing that, and that is because there is some promise in those results. But the trick will be now to deliver on the quantities of materials that are required, demonstrate that at the R&D level, and then have that made available to commercialization. The upscaling, and that's difficult. And it's not just the upscaling and the R&D, but it's the uptake from the commercial producers of this new input. So it has to be demonstrated that it's usable.
Yeah, I clearly agree because we believe that aquaculture, to be sustainable, has to have sustainable sources of proteins. And of course, fish feed is not yet sustainable or not now sustainable. So we have, in fact, a project, and we are coordinating an European project on the use of micro and macroalgae as sources of proteins for fish feed. And in fact, there are some companies that are associated with this project. One of them is here, Alga Plus, which was also formed by two former CIMAR members. They their PhD with us. And in fact, there are already uses of macroalgae to produce sustainable feeds for fish. Because of course, natural macroalgae are not nowadays enough, and you cannot control quality and guarantee controlled and even quality of the food. But of course, we have to think also that fish feed can be very diverse in terms of sources of proteins. We are now also using insect flour as a source of proteins. In fact, there are two companies in Portugal that are producing now insects directly to be used in fish feed for new organisms. And of course, we don't have to think only about carnivorous fish. We have to think also about other sources of fish. And that deals also with changing the mentality of the consumer, taking into account that we cannot only eat the top predators of the ocean, because that will be not sustainable at all.
So I think it is pretty clear that this innovation issue is complex. Complex not in the sense of the easiness to bring it about, but complex in the series of aspects that it impinges on, from research to industry, but the whole communication, marketing issue. All these are fundamental aspects of bringing innovation from the blue forward. So I would like to ask if you have perhaps one pet project, or not in the sense that it's small, but in the sense that it's possibly one that can more easily show what is the beauty of thinking of the marine for innovation in our societies. Victor, I think you have something very interesting to show us.
We have lots of pets in our research institute. It's sometimes difficult to choose one. It's like to choose which child you like more. But in this case, I will show and I will choose one project that is right at the beginning of this blue city, which is called Spillus. We know the natural capacity of many bacteria to degrade oils whenever there is an oil spill in the ocean, but sometimes this process is quite slow. And what we do in the Spillus project is we grab the bacteria from the source where the spill occurred, we enrich them in the lab, so we create enriched consortia, and so with species that belong to that environment, so whenever we are sending back these consortia, we are not introducing new species, what can create some imbalances in the process. So what we do, we enrich this bacteria, and then we use vehicles like the drone you can see here, which is a partnership with INESCTech, which is an institute also in Porto that produces technology, or ROVs that can, go underwater and directly inject this consortia on the oil spill. So it's like nowadays some new drugs that are directly by nanoparticles to the cancer cells. We are doing that with this consortia bacteria.
But this is fantastic. So you can intervene with this drone on an oil spill and inject bacteria who actually can biodegrade
and that was
oil spills.
Original from there, so it's not an introduction of new species. So.
Okay, that is really amazing. And I actually have knowledge of medical devices that are studied or have been mimicked from diatoms or from the extrusion mechanisms of cnidarians like jellyfish, in fact. So the possibilities of applications are enormous, and it must be so interesting to just think of application. I think the hardest part is, in fact, to think of the application.
Yeah.
That you can
But that's why it's important to observe the ocean, because like I mentioned before, whenever we see an organism like a cyanobacteria that spreads all over a region and nothing else grows there, that means that they are producing some allelopathic compounds that prevent other organisms to grow. And so why not use that species to produce new antifouling compounds to prevent mussels and barnacles to grow in the ship? So it's very important, not just molecular biology, and I like genomics, and I think that it's very important, and we do use it a lot, but the observation of the natural environment sometimes give us ideas that then we can transform into innovation by creating creating new processes.
Okay, thank you so much. Stephen, do you want to tell us about one of your favorite projects, so to speak?
So
You can choose.
It's difficult to start with a single project. Our approach is a little bit different, being a federally funded research center, and I know CMAR is a federal project or program as well. We have numerous projects that are not always internally driven. So they come from small, innovative Canadian companies, largely, but also from international partners that are looking to exploit a specific technology that's usually based on a marine resource. And so what we're able to provide within our research facilities are the capabilities of cultivating microalgae and seaweed and other marine organisms under very controlled conditions, as well as a very robust suite of facilities for analytical chemistry, natural product chemistry, and biomass transformation. So the idea is, although as scientists we all have ideas of our own, and I always have a project that I'm trying to drive, which is always on the back burner because we have a responsibility to respond to Canadian companies that are looking to overcome a technological or developmental barrier. And these are a lot of fun too. So we get projects that range from sort of a traditional exploitation of a biomass to enhance its value through identification and sort of quantification of a bioactive ingredient that may be present in a source of seaweed or seafood that we consume anyway, but for which we're trying to identify an additional health benefit for our industry partners so that they can market the benefits of the consumption of these traditionally consumed foods for either human health application or for animal health applications. That's one area that we sort of participate in all of the time. The more sort of far-reaching R&D development is more, and this is my personal interest, is in marine bioprospecting. So as in any other marine jurisdiction, we have an intertidal zone and a subtidal zone that we know very little about. I mean, we know something about the geology, we know something about the ocean physics, we know a little bit about the biology, but I think we can all appreciate the fact that we have not solved all of the questions about the biology of our intertidal zones. We don't know everything about the biodiversity of the organisms there or how we might exploit that biodiversity. And these are areas that we can sort of bite into as well by applying both the natural product chemistry capabilities and genomics capabilities to bioprospect. And I know, Vitor, this is similar to what you're doing with cyanobacteria. We focus less on cyanobacteria, as this may be an area of complementarity as opposed to an area of overlap, and focus more on eukaryotic microalgae. So we look at unique species of microalgae that occur in the aquatic environment that have a biochemistry that's not well defined, but can be exploited for the production of bioactive compounds, some of which are well known, pigments and antioxidants and high-value lipids, some of which are not well known, are not well defined. And so what we approach and how we approach it largely comes to us through the interests of our industry partners.
Okay, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think it's very virtuous what you're saying, because oftentimes in my trying to bridge the relations between industry and research, I see that the researchers are usually very eager to tell the industry what they're about, what they do, what they research on. Oftentimes it is a matter of listening to the industry, because the industry has tight timelines and very focused objectives, which may not be fully detailed. So they may have an objective to improve something. They may not just know how to go about it. But we need, as researchers, to really try and listen to their issues. And then we'll have all the time to imagine a solution and report it back. I think that is really fundamental when we try to bring innovation about, and it is about changing mentalities a bit on both sides. You want to?
I agree with you. I think it's very important that we can keep doing what we call basic research, because we have to have a freedom, like an artist, to think about ideas that probably cannot give a product in the next year or next, even 5 years. But give us the freedom to think about, research that could, in the future, potentially give a completely innovative product. But on the same time, since we are most of the times using public money, we have the obligation to go, as you said, to the companies, to the enterprises, to the state, and ask what are the main problems. And in our experience is very positive in that sense, because whenever we go to a company, we present our competences, and then we ask what are the problems. Every time the doors were completely open, and they result most of the times in very innovative projects. And for a researcher, it is also very important not just to have a published paper in a very nice journal, but also to see a product that can be shown in a fair like here. Yeah. And so we have recently been lucky enough to have companies in Portugal that see and saw this opportunity. And now we have two major projects. One is Valormar, that tries to valorize in a whole way the marine resources, because, for instance, we work a lot with canning industry to produce fish can, and most of the material is discarded. Now we have some companies and some research centers that are trying to use the scales, the heads, the guts, to produce other compounds that can be valorized and sold. And so it's very important. And Alga Valor, with a company that is here, they are producing very interesting compounds, but they need new ideas. And that most of the times comes from research, because we know what are the abilities of that material to have some antioxidant activity, or some anti-cancer compound, or some protective from UV. And so this connection, nowadays I feel quite optimistic, because it's quite open, and whenever we open our doors to the companies, they will open their doors as well. And so we have a very straight flux.
And I would add to that, in agreement with what Vitor is saying, is often the companies that we work with, we're not helping them to develop their first product. They're a viable company, and they have a product, and they have a byproduct or a waste stream. And I think that this is a quite common phenomenon that we're all familiar with. It's those byproducts or waste streams that we're looking to develop and add value to. Right. The company already exists, they have their primary process, and they come to us to help them develop something further to help them grow.
Yeah. So in fact, I think we can say that the advances in technologies that we have recently had in the last 20 years, perhaps, especially biotechnologies, are essential towards sustainability. What you are talking about right now is using waste streams and extract the residual value that's in them to continue to exploit them. This adds to the sustainability issue, and this is very commendable, and I think it's one of the greatest values of biotechnology. And in this respect, I think it's important to keep, when we talk about blue innovation, that we keep this in mind all the time. And I thank you for bringing it to the attention again and again. When we exploit the ocean resources, we want to do this in a sustainable way. And our effort is in creating more and more sustainability in our industry. When it's food or health, it doesn't matter, but our effort needs to be in that sense. We have 5 minutes left. I could ask you to tell us about a challenge. Where are we going next? What is relevant to you? And I know we can talk for a couple of days, but one thing that maybe from the technology side or maybe from the marketing side, what do you think would be most helpful for you to bring your products towards the market, towards society? Stephen, or as you want. Stephen,
okay,
perhaps.
no, Stephen.
So a challenge that we have, and I don't believe that this is a uniquely Canadian challenge, I think it's probably widely applicable, is the marine products industry, at least in Canada, and I suspect in other countries as well, is fragmented across many small and medium operators. And we have, in some cases, lack of communication between players within the blue economy, both from company to company, or company to research organization, or between companies and the legislators that have some impact in terms of how resources may be accessed or how they may be converted and marketed. And it's not an insolvable problem. You asked, where do I think things are going? So in Canada, for example, federally there's been an initiative to create areas of activity that are referred to as superclusters, which is a jargony word, but there is one being founded on the east coast of Canada, which is where I'm from, called the Ocean Supercluster. And the intent there is a federally led initiative to bring small and medium enterprises together with research organizations and academic laboratories to create the kind of critical mass that's required to develop the overall marine resource industry from a Canadian perspective, but I believe other countries are developing the same strategies. And that's what's going to be required, really, I think, to more fulsomely explore and exploit and capitalize on the marine resources that are available. Is better communication between innovative companies that are working in this area, better communication with the legislators that are going to control how marine resources may be exploited, but also to develop a critical mass, within regions and nations, but also between regions and nations to more comprehensively and in a coordinated way develop marine biotechnology as a viable, and it's a viable industry now, of course, but as an industry that is going to be able to support larger companies creating more innovative products and selling into larger markets. And I think that's coming.
Yes. No, I fully agree with you. I think we have major challenges. We have a huge natural resource that we don't know yet well, so that's one big challenge, and that has to be done in a global way, so we cannot work isolated, and cooperation and collaboration among countries is fundamental in this aspect. We have the human resources. We have more and more young people that is being formed in these aspects of marine biotechnology and marine sciences. We have the infrastructures. So we have, I think, almost everything, but we need to work all together. We have to, of course, we have these beautiful institutions like EMBRC that put us together in the same framework, and whenever we know, the other partner sometimes is across the Atlantic, we gain trust and we increase the confidence and to work with that person. So increasing the confidence among the partners, having this establishment of cooperation between or among institutions of research, universities, enterprises and the governments, it's the focal point so we can work all together using the same objectives. I think it's no point nowadays to work with our backs turned to our partners. And I think that working in that sense and having fairs like this is the best solution to have the marine sciences advances and the marine biotechnology with further innovation.
That's great. Thank you so much. I want to just take a couple of points that were raised to conclude this. And I would take from this last conversation that connectivity, the ability to connect, is really fundamental. And then to observe the ocean in order to be inspired. Lessons are there for us to learn if we just can read. And so with this, I thank you all for being here, for listening, and thank you, Victor, thank you, Steven, for a very nice conversation. Thank you.